Hello, welcome to the Hudson Institute. My name is Josh Block. I'm an adjunct fellow here, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this important discussion today with Wang Xiyue, who is an American hero. A former, a Princeton student of various things, who was directed by his advisors and helped by the university to turn his studies to Iran, and to go there to study not Iran, but linguistics, other things. And while he was there, he was the victim of an Iranian kidnapping plot that kept him in solitary confinement and in Evin Prison for over 3 years. He was taken during the Obama administration and freed during the Trump administration. And his experience has led him to turn his attention from the academic pursuits he was at Princeton and had been pursuing for many years, and turn the intensity of that intellect and that academic pursuit, obviously, to the source of his great pain and experience, which is the source of why he was taken, kidnapped, why he was held prisoner, why he was ransomed, and the meaning of that experience, and what it should mean for America and for our experience with the regime in Iran. So it is my intense pleasure to welcome my friend and American patriot, Xiyue Wang, to this conversation at the Hudson Institute.
Thank you, Josh, for having me. A great pleasure to be here.
It really is important for people to hear your story. I don't think it's hyperbole to describe you as an American hero.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. But I think at least I'm American patriot, I can say.
For sure, a patriot. You know, I don't think very many Americans have had the experience of being kidnapped by a hostile government and held in prison for many years on the basis of nothing but their own national identity.
That's right.
And that was your experience. And so, you know, thank you on behalf of the American people for being a symbol of freedom and for what this country represents.
Well, thank you very much. I remember when I was eventually released through the prisoner swap, the special representative for Iran at the time, Brian Hook, received me, and the first thing I told him is, I'm proud to be American, and I mean it.
You know, two things occur to me. One is the success of the Iranian propaganda effort. You know, they succeed in kidnapping you.
Yes.
And then in trying to procure prisoner swaps.
Yes.
I mean, this is a bit of an irony, don't you think? I mean, you're kidnapped by their violence.
Yeah.
And then they engineer a prisoner swap, implying somehow that you're a prisoner or something other than a kidnap victim.
Well, that's the whole point, right? So I was, if I may start from the beginning. In 2015, originally I was hoping to do research in Afghanistan. I needed a better Persian language. I already read Persian, but my Persian wasn't skilled enough. So I wanted to go to Iran.
Afghanistan initially, right?
Yeah. Right. So I wanted to go to Iran to take a summer Persian language course to improve my Persian and to prepare for my work in Afghanistan the following year. Unfortunately, the Iranian Language Institute, where foreigners usually learn the Persian language, didn't give me a visa for the summer. In November, unexpectedly, they approved my visa. With the advice of my professor, I was directed to go to Iran to do research instead of Afghanistan. Sorry,
No, we'll come back to this in great detail because I think the way you got to Iran and the support that you had, let's call it, from the from the university until you were taken is an interesting one. But before we go there, I want to talk about something else. Who are you? You know, I think, you know, who are you? You know, what happened to who is the person that got kidnapped and was held in prison for years? You obviously weren't. You were born outside of the United States.
Right.
You're an American citizen.
Yeah.
How did you get here? Who are you? Tell us who you are.
Well, so I came here in 2001 when I was 20 years old with my mother.
So shortly after 9/11, essentially?
Shortly after 9/11, we settled in Washington State, in Seattle. There I went to University of Washington. I always had interest in South Asian, Central Asian, Muslim cultures and history. So I went to University of Washington to study South Asia, India and Pakistan. There I learned Hindi and Urdu, and through the study of Hindi or Urdu and Islam in South Asia, I became interested in Central Asia, which is largely Persian speaking. And I picked up Persian language and I taught myself Pashto. Then after my college, I went to Harvard for Russian and Eurasian Studies master degree. And after Harvard, I spent a year working in Hong Kong. And then after that, I went to Afghanistan to work for the International Red Cross as a Pashto interpreter.
And what years is this?
This was in 2010 to 2011. So it happened to be the period of a most intense fighting in Afghanistan. And after
were you embedded with special operations groups?
No. I was
with the Red Cross?
With the International Red Cross. I was mainly stationed in Kandahar. So our work is humanitarian, making sure that all sides of conflict conduct their operations according to international law. And we visited prisons. We talked to local authorities. Things like that, pushing the parties of a conflict to act according to Geneva Convention. So there I had a lot of experience with the different kinds of local actors, and I saw a lot of atrocity. And I also realized the U.S. presence there wasn't necessary. It's unfortunate how it ended this year, but that's, of course, a separate story. So after that, with that experience, I got really interested in the history. I wanted to know more of Central Asia, Afghanistan. As you can imagine, it's a very understudied area. So I decided to come to Princeton to work on my PhD on Islamic and Inter-Asian history. Originally, my project was about Afghanistan. I wanted to improve my Persian. Obviously, Afghanistan isn't your place for immersion language program. So I wanted to go to Iran. Iran didn't give me a visa during the summer. It gave me a visa during in November. So in consultation with my professors, I was directed to go to Iran to explore research opportunities.
So you've abbreviated some of these details, which you and I have talked about, which is very interesting. Your as you say, your studies were in linguistics.
No, in history.
In history, but basically you were there to learn the language, right? You're to improve your linguistic skills in Persian and to develop.
Right.
History studies over Afghanistan and the region. It wasn't to go study Iran and Iranian history per se.
Well, that wasn't my intention to go there.
Right.
To study Iranian history in the beginning. It was only just intended for a period of language work.
Right. So as a result of the advice you got from your advisors and the folks at Princeton. To look maybe more at Iran after you got this visa rather than going to Afghanistan had been your plan. You go there and you're on what kind of visa while you're there?
I was on a language student visa.
A language student visa. And had you expressed or asked the university or others whether this was the right visa to be on, to be doing the things that you were going to be doing at this point?
Yes, I was constantly in touch with the university, reporting to them the situation, the difficulties, the problems I was facing.
And it was, but this is not this is me speaking, not you, but going to Iran with a language visa, but knowing that you were ultimately doing more research than just that would be a bit of a concern, I would think. And so when you reached out to folks to ask them, should I be worried about this? And they're, employed by the university or they're, to help facilitate this kind of exchange work. And maybe they're related to, important regime officials and others, and they would know the answers to things. And they say to you, no, this is fine. This is just fine. Don't worry about it. That would be, if I was you, I would be assured. I'd be reassured by that.
Yes, that's essentially. I think anybody in my situation would think the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you got to, so let's go back. So now you came to Seattle when you were 20. You start going to college there. Is your mom still living in Seattle?
Yes, my mom is still in Seattle. Yes.
And how is her health?
She's doing all right. Her health is not very good, as you know, as people get older. I think what happened to me really had a toll on her.
Mm-hmm. How old is she now?
She's 66.
Mm-hmm. So relatively young for a person, but this. And you were, and you're married and you have children.
Yeah, I have one child.
And where along your journey did you meet your wife?
So my wife and I met in Hong Kong shortly before I left for Afghanistan, and we started dating kind of remotely while I was in Afghanistan.
She's a very patient woman.
Yes, we used to meet somewhere in between, like in Delhi or in Dubai, during my R&R and all that. So things work out well. She's a remarkable woman, and I wanted to marry her. So I left Afghanistan and to return to China to be with her for some time as I was preparing for my going back to academia into a PhD program. Brushing up my language skills, reading up scholarly works. So in 2013, I came to the United States. I came back to the United States, to Princeton, to work on my PhD in history, to be precise, Islamicate Inner Asia, in the late 19th, early 20th century.
And Princeton is a renowned school for those studies, right? Bernard Lewis and the history of Muslim and Asian studies there is remarkable.
Yes.
One of the things that I think is remarkable about Princeton is the strength of its history and the history of its programs in Middle East and Islamic studies, going all the way back to Bernard Lewis and many others.
Yeah.
And in recent years, the university has become a center for a lot of Iran studies. We see, Hussein Mousavian and a whole range of folks having residency there at the university. So there's a lot of expertise at the university in Iran. And so when you were getting advice at this point, you're back now. Your wife is. You come back to the States. You're at Princeton. I don't know if was your child born by this point? Were you?
Yeah, my son was born in 2013, shortly before I returned to the United States.
So you guys are at Princeton, small family. Every year in graduate housing.
Right.
And your university is pretty well connected to these things, connected to the United States government, I would presume, and here and there. And so then, at what point are you ready to go to undertake these studies? Your wife and son will stay in the housing, and you'll.
Yeah. So my wife. My wife joined me in late 2014. She gave up her career and everything in China to join me in Princeton to support my study. So the hope. So at that time, my wife and I had an agreement that I would go abroad because the nature of my work, my academic research would require multiple archives, multiple languages. So I will do field research for about 2 years. And then we will meet with each other when I come back to the States, or we'll meet in a third country, however it would have worked out. So 2 years of field work away from the family was something my wife and I came to agreement to. But unfortunately, the way it happened, I was taken away from my family for 4 years, including the period of study and research outside the Iranian prison. Yeah.
So you say, obviously you're excited to go learn so at the time that you're about to go to Iran, the U.S. and Iran and the other powers have consummated the JCPOA.
Yes,
right? The Iran deal has gone through. The atmosphere between the U.S. and Iran, at least in academic and public policy circles in the Democratic White House, in the Obama administration, was very positive, right? And this is sort of what was going on at the time.
Yeah. So in July 2015, as you know, the JCPOA was concluded between the United States, Iran, and 5 other powers, 5 other global powers. And it was a short, actually, in retrospect, it was a short spurt of optimism that with the JCPOA, that is the Iran nuclear deal, by the way, the Iranian regime would gradually change its behavior, as President Obama and his aide Ben Rhodes have repeatedly said in different occasions. So within academic circles, and this is what I want to emphasize really, within academic circles, as you know, most academics, especially in elite schools, are on the liberal side. Many are progressive, and so this is what we as a student learned from our professors in classroom, that we believe that the U.S. has the U.S. has been an imperialist power. The way the U.S. Has been treating the peoples of the Orient or the Middle East in this case has been condescending and wrong.
So not the notion that America is the greatest force for good in the modern world and lifting people out of poverty, and that capitalism has helped, eliminate suffering. Not that there's sort of this exceptionalism to the approach, but the opposite of that. In fact, that the United States has been a negative force.
Yes, I think it is especially so in the field of Near Eastern or Middle Eastern studies, where America is portrayed as imperialist, condescending, negative power in the region. So basically, everything that has gone wrong in the region first can be attributed to British and French imperialism, and then after World War II, of course, American imperialism, which is also a rhetoric adopted by the Iranian regime.
Well, it's ironic, especially at the moment, considering the Abraham Accords, honestly, and the kind of the interconnectedness between the economic health of the American allies of the region, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Bahrain, so many, the UAE. These things are deeply connected now. So it's ironic to hear a notion so outmoded,
right,
and proven so by today's geopolitical reality.
That's, I guess, something I learned through my experience in Iran is that half of the reality isn't presented in the classroom. By saying half, I mean obviously not everything the United States or the Great Britain or France have done in history in those regions are positive. There's certainly problems, historical limitations. But I think in the academic sphere, there is tendency to overemphasize that aspect and then totally disregard the achievement we have brought to these regions and the positive role that Western powers have played in these regions.
So let's get back to your story. So you depart for Iran in an atmosphere of warmth.
Yes.
What was your flight like? How did you get? Did your wife come to the airport and see you off? Was your mom apprehensive? What was going on?
So my mom was. My mom has always been apprehensive about me traveling abroad. As you see, I traveled to Pakistan, India, and Central Asia, and Afghanistan, those places. In her opinion,
at the height of conflict, right? I mean,
and in her opinion, these are troubled places.
She would not be she'd not be wrong in her estimation of that.
Right, but for me, hey, I emerged okay. So, so Iran is a safe country in many ways. It probably has the lowest crime rate in the Middle East. So I completely disregarded my mother's concerns, and I went with a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, hoping that by being one of the first American scholars to study and do research in Iran in the auspicious time after the conclusion of JCPOA, I would be able to achieve a lot. But unfortunately, that effort was
so you arrive in Tehran when?
So I went to Tehran twice. The first time, late January, I believe January 26th. I arrived in.
Like you fly into the country?
Right, I flew to Tehran via Dubai. I returned to the U.S. During the Iranian New Year because everywhere was closed.
What month is that?
This was in March.
March, March. So you're there for a couple months.
Yeah, I spent about a month and a half in the U.S. And went back in the end of April and early May. And to start this time, the second trip, really start doing research work alongside with my language.
But you'd gotten to a point where you could do research, I imagine.
Yes. And I, by the way, with permission, I collected a lot of material. I've seen a lot of documentary material from the Iranian archives. The people at the level that I had in touch with, the archivists, the scholars, were very open-minded, very kind. They understand, obviously, Iran's position in the world, Iran vis-a-vis other powers. But I was naive because I didn't understand the Iranian regime. I took the warmth and hospitality of Iranian people for the regime in a way. I thought
You felt safe. You felt welcomed.
Yeah, I felt safe. I felt welcomed in many ways.
And so you were there so you'd been there for a couple of months. You come home for spring break, basically. You go back, and how long are you back in the spring before you're about to? What happens?
Well, in the spring, I came back and I prepared for further research, and I went back. There was no concern. Nobody has raised any concern to me. The situation back then, I would say, the JCPOA situation was still okay. When the first time and the second time around, when I was in Iran, I felt I was probably under surveillance. But hey, this is a police state. And it will take time for it to change. And America has taken, in my opinion at that time, America has taken the first critical step to right its wrong. So we should be hopeful and give the Iranian regime time and patience for them to adjust and change their behavior. So with that belief, I presented myself as an easy target.
So for how long were you able to do more research until?
The second time, from early May, when I arrived, I just jumped right into my research work. I got the permission from the archive and started reading archival material immediately. So that was about 2.5 months. I accomplished a lot during 2.5 months period.
And were you about to go home? What was the incident of, when did you start to feel that maybe something was wrong? What was the first indication that maybe the Iranians weren't happy with you?
Well, to start with, Iran is a police state, and I knew that. And so there were indications that I was being followed, being monitored. But I thought it's not.
It's not personal. It's standard behavior.
Yeah. It's not personal. It's standard behavior that could happen in other authoritarian countries. So I just thought. By doing what I do, being completely transparent, and not to get involved in politics or making sensitive comments, they would leave me alone. As a matter of fact, in most authoritarian countries, that would have been the case. But unfortunately, Iran wasn't your typical authoritarian country. In a way that most other authoritarian countries have a foreign relations with the United States. So Iran isn't.
Yeah, their motives are more complex in these ways.
Exactly. So what happened to me was a couple of hours before I was due to return to the United States, I received a series of phone calls from an unknown number. Eventually, when I answered, the other side told me, our Iranian police, we have some questions to ask you. Would you please come to this designated location with your passport and computer? So the location turned out to be very close to me, so I went promptly. There, two men in plain clothes arrived from outside, and they seated me down in a classroom. They seated me down in the office, and then started questioning me, asking me to show them my passport. They saw my U.S. passport, and then they saw my Chinese visas on my passport. And the first question they asked me was, "Are you a Chinese citizen?" And obviously, I needed a visa to go to China, and I wasn't a Chinese citizen. So I told them the truth. I wasn't a Chinese citizen. I really believe that's the moment so that they came to the conclusion that they could take me and extort the United States with me as a political pawn. Of course, in retrospect, I would come to the realization of that. So they interrogated me for a couple of hours, and then they let me go.
But they let you go, but they didn't let you leave the country?
They took my passport and the computer, and they told me, we will have to investigate you. You can go home. You can go to your residence now, but you will not be able to go back to the United States. So they allowed me to keep my phone, and then they told me, wait for our further communication. And then that's the first interrogation. I was prevented from coming home.
So were you able to then call your family and say something's wrong? Call the university? What did you do?
Yeah, I called my family. I called the university. Emailed the university, and also emailed the Swiss embassy, which represents the United States in Iran. So that was the first time.
And what response did you get from any of those folks? I mean, what advice did you get?
The advice I got is sit tight. Don't do anything. The Iranians probably just going to investigate you, and they will come to the conclusion that you have done nothing wrong. Let you go. Again, I want to say this is July 2016. at the height of JCPOA. So the atmosphere was very different. But looking retrospectively, it's such a misplaced optimism.
So shortly after that first experience, someone comes to collect you for further discussions, I imagine.
They called me again in the middle, probably July, probably after 5 days, 6 days. And then again, 3-4 hours of interrogation or questioning, if you will. And then let me go again. They told me if we come to the conclusion that you have done something against Iran, we will arrest you. But again, for me, I knew I didn't do anything against Iran. So there was nothing to be scared of until August 3rd, 2016. Mm-hmm. I read a Wall Street Journal piece by Jay Solomon that exposed the true extent of the January 2016 prisoner exchange by the Obama administration with Iran. $1.7 billion, 400 millions of which was delivered to Iran as pallets of cash. Totally $1.7 billion.
So it was a ransom that the United States paid for the release
was given to Iran.
Kidnap victims.
Yes, was of course this is this was Iranian frozen Iranian asset in the United States. This was the Iranian money. So the Obama administration argued this wasn't ransom. This is their money, and this is just a part of the agreement on the side of JCPOA. But I remember Donald Trump as the presidential candidate immediately came forth and said, "This is a ransom, and what Obama's administration did will encourage Iran to take more Americans hostage," and that's exactly what happened. Because guess what? No matter how the Obama administration would spin it, the Iranians look at that exactly as ransom.
So they come after at what point do you meet your imprisonment?
So that was quite dramatic. In August, so when I saw the Jay Solomon piece, it was already late in the late afternoon, early evening of Thursday. So the Swiss embassy was closed, and I thought I got a hunch I would be taken hostage. There's an imminent danger that I didn't.
Got a feeling, yeah.
Right. But I thought I would communicate with the Swiss when they're open on Sunday. But before I could communicate with the Swiss embassy, Sunday morning, first thing around 8, I received a call from the same interrogator asking me to go to Hotel Azadi, a designated a suite for questioning. Azadi in Persian means liberty or freedom. It's ironic that Hotel Azadi is located right in front of Evin Prison. So there in the suite of Hotel Azadi, I saw my computer, my passport laying on the coffee table. And the interrogator told me, we have a finished investigation on you. We don't think you've done anything wrong. We will let you go home. But we will take you to the airport. So with their permission, I called the Swiss embassy for a Swiss embassy staff to meet with me in the airport to make a travel arrangement. At the same time, I called my wife. I told her that I'll be home in 24 hours, within 24 hours. So everybody I could think of knew that I was on the way home. But instead of taking me to the airport, the Iranian interrogators, as it turned out, the agents of the Ministry of Intelligence took me to Evin Prison.
So everyone thinks you're leaving the country.
Yes. In fact, I believe they purposefully let me call them, let me call the Swiss and my wife, because that will come back to me as an immense source of anxiety under solitary
Yeah,
confinement.
that they don't know that they think that you're on your way home, and
Right. And then exactly that's what happened. So they took me to the Evin Prison. They announced my arrest under espionage and infiltration charges, and then they sent me straight to the Ministry of Intelligence prison, so-called Section 209. There, I was thrown into solitary confinement for 18 days. I was subject to daily interrogation. I was not allowed to speak to any, I was not allowed to call my wife until the 19th day. You can imagine, I told the Swiss and told my wife I was on my way home. A horrible 19 days of anxiety. I didn't know how panicked and crazy they would have become, not being able to know my whereabouts.
So when it becomes clear that you've been kidnapped and you're in Evin Prison,
Yeah.
I would imagine that everyone who knows you here in the United States jumps into full force to make it known and get out there and start ringing the alarm bells.
No, that was
So no.
No.
Okay. So your wife obviously, I would imagine, goes to Princeton to say, what should we do? Is that what happens? I mean, what happens?
Right. So so my wife spoke to Princeton authorities, through which also she communicated with the State Department during this time, but the advice she got was the Iranians must be making a mistake. Once they investigate and come to the conclusion that Wang didn't do anything wrong, they will release him. So sit tight and don't panic. Don't let anybody know because if this leak gets leaked into the media, the Iranians would think he's important and then jack up his price or make his situation worse. So for a year, nobody knew except a small circle of people that I was arrested.
Does it sound familiar to you that the university didn't make any public effort to do anything about the case?
That was clear. There was no publicity about my case. Nobody knew. Even my classmates didn't know.
So the university knew, for sure, and your wife knew, and there were questions about whether there should be public discussion of it.
Right.
And there turned out to be none.
None. Right.
Okay.
And eventually the Iranians broke my case.
Yeah. So you're at some point they take you out of solitary and they start to really talk to you, and you in interrogations they're talking to you. What are the Iranians saying to you?
Well, in the first 18 days, they questioned me at least 3-4 hours a day, maybe sometimes longer. As it turned out, they were preparing me for a propaganda video they were going to do in the end of this interrogation period. So when they took me in the end of the 18th day, they told me we have come to the conclusion that you haven't done anything wrong, which apparently was what I thought. I didn't do anything wrong. So they said, okay, so since you haven't done anything wrong, we have written a positive report about you. We will take you to see our chief, and if you strike a positive impression, he may let you go, or at least release you on bail so you can wait for your process outside. That would have been a very positive development, obviously. So I was taken to Hotel Istiqlal in northern Tehran. There, an old man came to me and he said, I will ask you some questions, and then we will record your answers, and we'll analyze your facial expressions to make sure whether you are telling the truth. If we come to the conclusion that you are telling the truth, we will release you. And then we started a probably 3-hour long filming session. And soon enough, it became clear to me this is not about me telling truth or not, because they were asking me opinion questions. Things like, what do you think of U.S. Iran relations, U.S. policy in the Middle East, and things like that. It's about opinion, so it cannot be true or false, right? But at that moment, I could only play along, and it just turned out these are the questions they asked me over and over again during these 18 days. So they knew exactly how I would respond. A very skillful tactic, really, for making what they were making. So in retrospect, they have a roadmap. They had a roadmap laid out from day one, or even before day one, that what they're going to do to me. They were just doing that according to the prearranged steps.
And at some point, at any point, does your interrogation become less friendly?
Then they took me out of solitary confinement. They left me alone for about 10 days. And then all of a sudden, as I was hoping, they would still let me go, since I really didn't do anything, and I made the propaganda video for them, so maybe they will let me go, I thought. But instead of letting me go, after 10 days, all of a sudden interrogation started again. This time, they changed interrogator, and it became much more intense, aggressive 2 interrogation sessions. So basically, they asked me what I have done in Iran, and by telling them the truth, obviously that didn't fly for them. Eventually, they told me, look, you're an American spy. You need to confess that you are an American spy, because we need you to be an American spy to achieve a prisoner swap deal with the United States, so we can get our detainees back, we can get our money back. Without you being a spy, we have no deal. So you must confess. If you don't confess, be assured that you will never be able to return to the United States. Be assured that you will never be able to see your wife and son, and you will rot in this Iranian prison. And we will send you back to the solitary confinement until you confess. It was, I would say, the most devastating moment in my life. I was entirely confounded. I thought of resistance, but then the natural question would be, resisting for what? They were actually as it turned out, what they wanted was one-line confession that I'm an American spy, in Persian and English, and nothing else. They didn't need other details. They just wanted that one sentence for me to say I'm an American spy. And for me, I was thinking, well, by admitting being an American spy under this condition, I was not betraying anybody but myself, right? I felt an intense feeling of, how do I put it? being insulted.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also betrayal. Me myself being a coward, betraying myself. But at least my conscience is clean. I didn't betray my country. And then after that, they just left me alone. They never came back. Never wanted anything else. What I didn't know is that according to Iranian law, that one sentence of confession is adequate to convict me and give me 10 years of sentence.
And that's what happened.
That's what happened, yes.
So rather than kind of like, at every turn they seem to kind of trick you, right? They sort of, if you do this, you'll get out. If you do this, you get, and then we'll take you to the airport, and then no, and you sign this, it's fine.
Yeah, you would think, I have dealt with a lot of authorities, government authorities across continents, and then the bottom line is the government authorities maybe, I felt, maybe bureaucratic, maybe there are a lot of red tapes, but they don't usually lie to you just like that. So in the beginning, I really trusted what they said. But then eventually, it turned out that was their tactic.
And what was the reason? They said they arrested you for espionage. What was the real reason? What were the reasons that they gave for arresting you? What were the technical reasons that they used?
The infiltration.
Infiltration?
Infiltration.
And that you were there under false pretenses? You were doing work that you shouldn't be doing? What was what was their allegation?
So basically, for example, one of the important, which I have written, one of the important allegations and evidence that they used against me was once they asked me what I thought of U.S. Iran relations, and I just told them, look, U.S. and Iran have a lot of problems between themselves, between the two countries. They may not want to be friends, but they don't have to be at each other's throat. So, in my opinion, even if Iran does not want to have a very close relationship with the United States, the United States, the two countries should make effort to normalize their relations. The United States can have relations with so many other authoritarian countries. Why not Iran? And I told them, President Obama should visit Iran. And then my interrogator just sneered and said, no, we will never welcome any U.S. president to visit our country. Never, ever. And then that was actually used as evidence against me in court, to my surprise, because in their thinking, Obama's JCPOA, the engagement with Iran, is an iron fist under a velvet glove. They say that. So they believe Obama's intention was regime change through engagement, and then therefore they told me, you think, meaning me, they said, you are American, therefore you must listen to Obama like we Iranians listen to our supreme leader. And then you also said in interrogation that you want Obama to visit Iran. So you are a supporter of Obama's engagement. And because Obama's engagement is iron fist under a velvet glove, so you are a part of that iron fist.
You want to overthrow the clerical regime here,
Yes.
you're a threat to the regime.
So you can see the kind of their logic train, right? So that's their argument.
So when they're interrogating you, they straight up tell you that you're a pawn, that they need to extort the United States for money.
Yes,
right?
for money and for prisoners.
And prisoners, and clearly they're bargaining. And what else did you learn from them in the course of the interrogation? And by the way, we've talked about 6 months of the years you were there.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, this must have been an incredibly difficult and painful thing to experience, and I can't imagine how much work it's taken to be able just to sit and talk about it in normal terms.
Yeah.
What else did you take away from kind of from an intellectual academic point of view as you've begun to examine the motives of the regime that took you and how they conduct themselves on the world stage in the years since, at the time and in the years since?
For me, this is really a process, right? So you can't, how do I put it? You can't be more committed to this Obama idea of engagement, or the U.S. has done great wrong in the Middle East, starting from 1953, the toppling of Mossadegh. So our education on college campus steeped with this, right? Steeped in this, telling the students how wrong the United States has been since the early years of Cold War. And I subscribe to that. I believe that the JCPOA was a good thing. We're taking an important step to right or wrong. But then what happened to me, starting from on the street of Tehran, talking to the Iranian people, talking to Iranian youth and shopkeepers, taxi drivers, just see how Iranians look at America. Then you start getting some different perspective, right? And then the way that the regime was treating me. And in the beginning, they said, we will never allow U.S. president. We will never allow U.S. president to visit Iran. But that suggested that even if Obama was ready to visit, they would block him. So what does that tell you? That means there's a half of story missing. We overemphasize on what we have done wrong towards them, but we do not talk about their motivation, their agency, why they decide to do certain things towards us.
Well, just to this point, it's very interesting. I mean, yeah. I seem to recall that once you got back from this horrific experience, you were freed under the Trump administration. At that point, the relationship between the Trump administration and Iran had gone, had been one of pressure, not of accommodation.
Yeah.
And you were then released. And that I can't remember you were talking to someone in the New Jersey area, and I think that the remark was, well, it was that damn confrontational Trump policy that got you kidnapped, or something like that.
That's right.
But in fact,
that's right.
You were. And I think the response was, no, I was kidnapped under President Obama.
3 months before Trump was elected. And I was forced into confession 2 months before Trump was elected.
So I think this is a really interesting point in terms of the optimism that those who strike deals with Iran have that the regime will change its behavior. In a period of its greatest honeymoon with the United States, they kidnapped you and told you where they were using as a pawn for ransom.
And this was 2 months before Trump was elected.
Months before Trump was elected. So it's not even a question of, I just think that there's a failure to reconcile the real actions of the real Iran with the real security needs that we have, rather than romanticize the desired behavior by Iran, by folks here, in order to have to take less difficult steps to defend ourselves. Now, as you've become more of a scholar of Iranian behavior in the period since you've come back, how do you assess the recent election in Iran, the change of presidency? What are you seeing in terms of their domestic dynamic now?
Well, look, I wasn't a student of Iran when I went to Iran. Mm-hmm. My field was really Russia and Soviet Union, Islamic Inner Asia, Afghanistan. My only connection with Iran was Persian language. So although I had a very good academic training, it was my belief, and belief of my professors, of course, that I could just learn as I go, which I did. So my understanding of Iran, up until the time I was released, was very much based on my experience, my communication, or what I have seen, my communication with Iranians in and outside prison, what I have seen in the Iranian propaganda, right? What I have seen from inside Iran, Iran's relation with outside world, the regime's relation to its own people. So my knowledge of Iran up until that moment,
it was kind of very personal. It was very intimate in a way.
Right. Yes.
And not geostrategic, and not wrapped up in nuclear issues, and not wrapped up in terrorism. It was just wrapped up in how does the country work? How does the people work?
It's basically by witnessing, talking to Iranian people, and then being able to synthesize that knowledge through my academic background, my understanding of authoritarian regimes of Soviet Russia, China, and other countries, right? So this is how I came to understand the Iranian regime, and for the most part, also this is a process, right? So I was jailed with Iranians from all walks of life, teachers, professors, journalists. Petty vendors on the street, and people who circumvented the sanction for the regime, but because they couldn't agree how much they would pocket.
They didn't pay the right kickback. They got,
or people who laundered money with the regime, and then former regime officials, Iranian diplomats, and even members of elite families, right? So my communication with them informed me a lot about how this country works, and a lot of my understanding, as it turned out, when I came back, I kept reading more serious literature and analysis by more clear-eyed Iran scholars. I came to understand a lot of my observation and understanding when I was in Iran turned out to be right, thanks to those Iranians who shared with me.
So what kind of lessons, what kind of perspective did you pick up there that you think most people kind of don't really get in that way? The country works on a system of corruption and family. I mean, what sort of aspects of power landed people in that prison, and how did they get out?
Well, a lot, really a lot that I've learned in the prison.
Yeah.
But I think one very big thing that really stands out and comes up all the time in our debate in this country is about U.S. leverage, U.S. sanctions towards Iran. The dominant rhetoric would be here in the United States is that the sanctions are immoral, right? They're very brutal. They're creating problems for Iranian people, creating a lot of sufferings, and you can't be possibly morally right if you
certainly Trita Parsi would like you to believe this.
Obviously. So you can't be. You don't have any moral ground to justify the sanctions, right? I argue the same. I would argue the same when I went to Iran, before I went to Iran. But what I have seen in Iran really informed me otherwise, because many Iranians, obviously, they're taking the heat of the sanctions, but you talk to them, and then many of them would tell you, yeah, we don't like sanctions. Yes, this creates a lot of problems. Our economy is collapsing. But we also understand why the U.S. is sanctioning Iran. That's because of the regime's behavior. Yeah. And what could the U.S. do otherwise? So as long as this regime behaves the way it does, there will be sanctions. And in fact, many Iranians have told me, even when there were no sanctions, or there were fewer sanctions, that the regime didn't behave any better the Iranian people didn't benefit from that.
Yeah.
And then so, contrary to what we would imagine here, many Iranians said sanctions are difficult, are bad, but we want them because this put the regime under pressure, and hopefully with heavy sanctions, one day this regime would be gone.
Yeah, I think one of the most remarkable mistakes that the Obama administration made, and I think Hillary Clinton herself said it in her book, was not standing up more forcefully in 2009 when the uprising was going on there at that time, when Netta was shot. And honestly, it's the same thing now, not making enough of. I hope the Biden administration will put more emphasis into the focus on the breadth of the riots around the country. The uprisings, there's no water, there's no fuel, there's no bread. All over Iran, people are coming out into the streets.
A very well-known former Obama official have said, if we sanction Iran, then we will push the Iranian people towards the Iranian regime. They will rally around the Iranian regime against the United States. Then we've seen
which is the opposite is true, right?
In 2017, 2018, 2019, Iran saw unprecedented protests and demonstrations, anti-regime. And you see all these protests and demonstrations spontaneously organized by the Iranians, not those organized by the regime. Give me one example. They shouted anti-American slogans. Give me one example. This particular scholar, former Obama official, repeatedly predicted wrong in top journals and publications. So once I raised this question on social media, I said, perhaps you can explain how, if that would have been the case, why the Iranian people came out despite of U.S. sanctions against the Iranian regime, not against the United States. Mm-hmm. He blocked me. Mm-hmm. He blocked me on Twitter.
Well, one of the things I have found is the debate around whether it's U.S. policy toward Iran relative to its totality and their support for Hezbollah and ISIS and Assad and al-Nusra and Hamas, every flavor of terrorism, or their conventional weapons threat, or their nuclear program. There's a desire by some to suggest actually even more than what you're saying, is sort of along the lines. The same people suggested, in fact, that Iran and Syria are America's natural allies in the region, rather than Israel and the Arab states. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is a concern, after the Afghanistan withdrawal, that that the United States is seen as a less reliable partner, less reliable player in the region, at the end of the day, it was Obama wanted to try. He kept talking about wanting to balance the Sunnis and the Shiites, but he tried to remove America as the fulcrum of that balance. And it strikes me that that's simply, it's untenable for America not to be the guarantor of security, unless America would like to see China or Russia or Iran emerge as the dominant force in that region. Having had the sort of benefit of several years of kind of hindsight, now you've been home for a little while, you've been able to watch these things develop, you've spoken to, I'm sure, many policymakers at very high levels who've greeted you since you've been back. What are your impressions now about the Biden administration's policy? What do you think they're trying to achieve? And what would you do? If you were in charge of the Iran policy, how would you pursue a policy that would get Iran to either return to the international community in good standing, if they want the benefits of the global economy and all these other things, or continue to isolate and pressure the regime so that we could deprive them of the tools to do us all harm?
I think the Obama administration has a fundamental misunderstanding of the regime. That is, Obama always said, once we engage the regime, we let them taste the benefit of being a part of a global community. They would gradually become a responsible actor. I think that idea that
romantic concept
it is totally wrong, because the Iranian regime, which I have written repeatedly, they do not want be a part of international community. If you want to be a part of international community, you don't take foreigners hostages. You don't export your revolution to your neighbors.
Yeah, you probably don't launch missiles at the world's largest oil refinery.
Right, and then you don't sabotage tankers and cargo ships in international waters. Right, you don't conduct terrorist attacks that can be clearly traced back to Tehran, not only in the region, but in far-flung places in South America, in Europe, and elsewhere.
Right here in Washington, D.C.?
Right. I'm trying to, right, here in Washington, D.C., and not long ago, trying to kidnap American citizen on American soil.
Just this week, there's a report that an Iranian agent was arrested in Cyprus as part of a large-scale attempt to kill prominent Israeli business people as part of a terror attack there as well.
Right.
Just this week.
So it's never about Iran letting Iran be a part of international community. They have demonstrated so many times they want to be an outcast, because by being an outcast, they got certain benefits that would be to the interest of the regime, but at the expenses of Iranian people. And then that's how the regime runs itself and manages the country.
Do you think another JCPOA, another deal, another modus vivendi with the regime in Iran as the Biden administration is seeming to want, whether or not it's hermetically sealing of their nuclear deal, is the best way to get the Iranian regime to moderate and become a country that tolerates women going out with a hijab or watching television, or becomes less supportive of regional dominance? Its effort to
the Biden administration's Iran policy is failing. I'm not saying it will fail. It is failing because as you remember, in March again, Iranian New Year, the Iran envoy of Biden administration said we're looking forward to this constructive engagement with Iran. And then shortly after that, they even acquiesced China and Iran signing a 25-year strategic partnership deal. And even a senior State Department official said, commenting on that deal, we want China and Iran to have a good, healthy, productive relations.
Yeah.
And how is that panning out?
It's interesting, just as an aside, one of the things I recall about the JCPOA was so troubling was that even when we were to trigger sanctions to go back into force, agreements that had been done in the OK period were grandfathered in. Mm-hmm. So if you do a 25-year deal over the oil fields here before the snapback happens, they can try to claim it's a legit deal. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, the China-Iran situation was a separate discussion, obviously. But the point being, I think the Biden administration thought, okay, by facilitating a better China-Iran relation, that can be a part of the engagement. So that will entice Iran back to negotiation and behaving itself, right? How did that happen?
How did it work?
How is that panning out? We know that the Biden administration was reluctant in enforcing sanctions on China's illicit purchase of Iranian oil. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, instead of being an incentive for Iran to come back to negotiation, it has become a disincentive, because that illicit Chinese purchase has allowed Iran to stay financially afloat and then have more leverage to resist the Biden administration effort to reel it in, right? Even a couple of days ago, Blinken has said, or some State Department official have said, we have asked China to decrease its purchase of Iranian oil, right? It clearly shows the Biden administration's approach to Iran is not working, right? And then also recently there were pro-engagement activists such as Hossein Mousavian, right, and others published on leading foreign policy journals, arguing left and right how we can save the nuclear deal. Meaning we should lower our expectations. What did Biden say when he was a presidential candidate? There's a smart way to be tough on Iran. So, we will argue, we will negotiate a longer, stronger deal.
Agreement. Yeah.
Yeah, and then now these folks are arguing if you want to, revive the deal, forget about that longer and stronger part.
Yeah, and give us $10 billion this week. They announced give us $10 billion in back payments for, just for goodwill.
Just for goodwill, right? And then what these engagement people do not argue is that Iran is gaining irreversible R&D knowledge about their nuclear
You're going
program.
where I was thinking, which is that, we're getting close to the end here, but one of the things that concerns me most is that, Iran has already amassed enough 60% material that if it wanted to up enrich it to a bomb to 90%, it could do so in just a matter of a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, with a single cascade of centrifuges. They could be doing that right now because the IAEA has no visibility into any of their facilities. They continue to amass more quantities. And I wonder how much ambiguity can we tolerate? How much ambiguity can the world tolerate from a regime that is so out of step with the norms on every level? And I ask you, I think, how do you see the confrontation with Iran over its nuclear program resolving? Does Iran get a nuclear weapon if the Biden administration continues its course? What needs to happen in order for that not to happen?
So, this is a complicated issue, of course. But I think, and back to your earlier question, what I think should have been done. After Biden winning the election, and apparently we had an uncertain period of in terms of Iran policy. So I started writing and urging the Biden administration to continue the Trump administration's maximum pressure approach to Iran for the policy continuity that, in my opinion, was working. We have been able to bring down the Iranian foreign reserve to a very, very low level. China wasn't emboldened to support Iran at the expense of the United States. And then the strike on Soleimani that killed Soleimani has achieved the desired deterrent effect. And all of that, in the course of last couple of months, have been squandered away.
I'm concerned too. I mean, I think you laid out a very clear set of power vectors that were driving in the right direction. And the Iranian economy, I don't think many people know that according to the World Bank and the IMF, their foreign currency reserves dropped from 180 billion to about 4 billion.
Right.
And that's that puts the country on the verge of a balance of payments crisis. And so, they're asking for 10 billion now. They're getting these other. They need that breathing space. They want that, and I think if we were smart and we were continue to shrink that breathing space, they would be more pliant. What do you think the purpose of sanctions should be? Should the purpose of sanctions be to get the Iranian regime to come to the table to negotiate, or should the purpose of sanctions be to kind of force the Iranians to choose between making a deal at the table or facing balance of payments crisis and sort of economic calamity for the regime?
Basically, I agree with what Secretary Pompeo has said in this regard in 2018 and onwards, that Iran has to choose, the Iranian regime has to choose between maintaining its economy or supporting its proxies, right, and expanding its malign behavior. And then that's what the U.S. sanctions should target, right? So the point being, through the sanctions, the U.S. Should force Iran back to negotiation table and negotiate a longer and stronger deal. And I think that's an achievable goal.
I certainly hope so, and I think the other thing that gives me some hope is that while in the last debate about these issues, the advocates for the JCPOA, or for a weaker JCPOA as we got, had a disingenuous argument. They said, well, it's either this agreement or total calamity and war in the Middle East. And I think as we've seen over the past many years, there has been a middle ground where mowing the lawn and keeping them at bay has worked a bit, and it did not result in a total absolute conflagration in the region. So I have some hope that the Iranians will be able to be kept in check, but it will require a lot of vigilance. And I have to say I'm immensely grateful to you for your courage and fortitude as a human being to have withstood. And we just touched the very surface of the kinds of things you went through, and then to bring that experience back and not turn away and want to go be a gardener and go grow wine or, do something else, but to turn that experience into something meaningful and to be an advocate for freedom. Yes. And to stand up for America and to fight for our future, it means a great deal. So I'm incredibly grateful that you'll be a powerful voice in this Iran policy discussion for many years to come.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to say that America is a great power, and then this is something I think it is really worth saying is that just look at how America is regarded by people around the world. We, as Americans who do not spend much time abroad, or let's say who do not spend much time in more difficult places abroad, tend to overlook the fact that this country is looked at as the beacon of freedom. Remember, in Iran, in Venezuela, in Hong Kong, and in Cuba, when people come out in the name of freedom to protest and demonstrate in the name of freedom, they spontaneously raise American flags. And I want to point out to you what that meant for me as American, as American by choice. Mm-hmm. I am not a U.S. born American, but naturalized American. That's a tremendous amount of pride.
And power.
And power. Yeah.
It's one of the things that I think it makes America so unique, and you're describing it is, our role, as American exceptionalism, our exceptional role as the only country founded on the principle of liberty and freedom, and that, at the end of the day, if we don't stand up and make sure the dollar is worth something and that free trade can go forward, the other forces of power in the world won't be benevolent.
Yes, exactly. And then this is what I want to say about our current administration, that it talks about diplomacy, but it doesn't really explain what diplomacy is in their thinking, right? So diplomacy without leverage is appeasement, because that means you don't want to use your deterrence. You want to use policy tools such as sanctions as a means to achieve legitimate goals. I think that's wrong. That means, in practical terms, that what makes a power is the capacity
and the willingness, right?
Yeah. So we all know America doesn't really matter who's the president, has the capacity, but the Biden administration apparently has no will to put American capacity in good use.
Well, I think one of the things that we are all concerned about now, especially in the wake of the Afghanistan withdrawal and some of the president's comments about the use of force in that regard, is that, alluding to something you said earlier, it now makes it that most adversaries will feel the need to challenge the United States to see if that game theory, if that really holds, if we hold or they do. And it makes it's ironic that it will produce not the outcome that the president said he wanted, which is a safer environment for American soldiers in the world, but actually make it more difficult.
Exactly.
And same thing with as you say, as not recognizing or seeing Iran with clear eyes. So I really, again, thank you so much for making it possible for us to see Iran with clear eyes and hear more. And we look forward to talking much more with you in the months and days and years to come about what to expect from Iran and how we ought to look at it and understand
Thank you very much, Josh.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.